Mickey highlighted the fact that our theme this year is the theme of servanthood and servitude, and looking at what it means to be a servant, how we understand that phrase, how we understand the work that we are called to do as servants of God. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time this year looking at the people who are specifically described as servants of God. And that's not a very long list. There's not just a huge selection of characters for us to look at that have that title, have that moniker of servant of God connected to them. But one of which that I would like to spend a little bit of time considering this evening is the man that we just got through reading about, Caleb. And if you were following along with Luke in the ESV, you'll recognize that when I say Caleb is holy, a servant of God, or a holy servant of God, that I'm using a little bit of wordplay for what we read him doing in those passages, and what we read him saying in those passages. Caleb is not an Israelite, he is a Kenite. His name comes from a word that means like a dog, and in that he kind of lives up to his name. He is very tenacious, and he is ferociously loyal. When his master gives him a command, he is going to do everything he can to fulfill that command entirely. But not only does that view make him stand out from the nation of Israel at times, it would be fair to say he was holy, H-O-L-Y, but the way that he describes himself is someone who wholly or fully has followed the Lord. And I would like for us to take a little bit of time to think about, what does that look like? What does it look like when someone wholly or fully follows God? And it would be well for us to think about what he says there in Joshua 14, but I want to take your minds back to Numbers 14 for a moment. Because in Numbers 14, something that we maybe don't pay close attention to is here, this isn't Caleb saying, I have fully followed God. This is God saying that. In Numbers 14 and verse 24, as you look at that passage, there's a few statements that stand out from it. God says, my servant Caleb, he has a different spirit. He has followed me fully. Notice how God views the life of Caleb. If God speaks about Caleb that way, how do you hope that God will speak about you? I think I can speak for all of us. I hope that I can speak for all of us. I'd say, I want God to speak about me that way someday. My servant Kyle, he's got a different spirit. He has followed me fully. I pray that God will speak about me that way someday. So if I want that to be the case, maybe I should learn some lessons from the life of Caleb. Maybe I should look at some of the things that Caleb did. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time this evening looking at three things that stand out to me about the servant, a holy servant, Caleb. Number one is Caleb set the example. Holy servant set examples. Numbers chapter 13 is what is on my mind. And that reading, when you read through that, and I encourage you to maybe this evening or tomorrow, but take a little bit of time and read through that as you reflect on the thoughts of Caleb. It plays out like a drama. I mean, it's almost like a cutscene in a great movie. We're going to have this scene where we flash over to these spies that have went into the land, and they're like the commandos. They've got these 12 guys that are just creeping through enemy territory, and they don't just go in and hit up some of the major attractions, Jericho, and come over here to Jerusalem, and they travel from south to north. They're coming in from the south, and they're going to go all the way up to the very tip of the land in the north, and they're going to come back, and when they come back, they're saying, guys, you're not going to believe the things that we found. Look at this cluster of grapes. 2 guys are holding it on their shoulders. The land is rich. It's richer than we could have ever imagined. God said flowing with milk and honey. He meant it. That place is amazing. But the people who live there are terrifying. The people who live there are the sons of Anak. There are these mighty warriors, men who are renowned for their ability to squash you like a bug. And not just because they were great warriors, they were unusually tall. They were these great. And matter of fact, in verse 33, Numbers 13:33, I believe it is, he says, this is what's left over. It's a part of the Nephilim. So these are these great, mighty warriors in the land. There's nothing we can do about that. And for just a moment, I want you to put yourself in Israel's shoes. What have we done so far? In the past, 100 days, maybe in the past year we've got to this point where we have left Egypt, we've crossed the Red Sea, but we spent all this time at Mount Sinai watching the mountain burn around us as God's presence was there, reminding us who He is. And we've seen the Red Sea part. Like, we've seen some amazing things on this journey. And along the way, God's Spirit, what has it been? It's been in front of us in a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud during the day. We've seen some amazing things. But who are we really? Because just so many days ago, we were working for the Pharaoh. We were slaves. And God came and set us free, and it's been awesome, but we're not even able to make our own food. We have to get God to provide food for us. We have just we've not had any battle experience. There's not been any foes up to this point. We've really just been running and following. And now you want us to go in there and take the land from these great giants? Be honest, I know what the right thing to do was in that moment. I don't know that I would have made the right decision. Most of Israel doesn't make the right decision, save for two. Two men are pointed out, Joshua and Caleb. And I want you to notice something, and young people especially, I want you to notice this. When I say that they set the example, recognize that doesn't mean people followed them. It doesn't mean that they set the example and everybody said, okay, if Joshua and Caleb can have courage, I can have courage. Instead, they said, Joshua and Caleb, you're out of your mind. And when they wouldn't let it go, they picked up stones and said, Joshua and Caleb, we're going to shut you up because we are not going in there. Joshua and Caleb, they set the example. And sometimes you have to set the example and nobody's going to follow you. Sometimes you have to show people this is the right thing to do, and nobody's going to pay heed to that. But you know what? There were people that paid heed to that. They weren't the older generation. The older generation passed away in the wilderness. But there's a younger generation that recognizes the things that go on there. And when they come to this place again, and Joshua and Caleb, now old men, are going, let's go in there and do what we have to do, they're saying, we are right behind you. We are ready to go. We will go and we will face Canaan's mightiest warriors, and we will topple its most fortified cities. We will follow God into Canaan. And think about that too. In that moment, setting the example, I got to be honest, I don't know, with everything that was going on, I would not know the right words to say. And I want to think of the speech that rallies everybody's courage and gets everybody fired up, like, yeah, we can do this. But do you remember what Caleb said in that moment? Do you remember when it came to this, his great war cry that he uses to set the example for the people? When everybody is gathered together, Caleb quiets them, verse 30, and just says this: we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. I don't think anybody's making a movie of Caleb's words there. That's not a Braveheart line. That's not a, you can take our lives, but you will never take our freedom. That's not this great. He just says, look, we need to go in there and do it. God has brought us to this point. We're going to get it. Let's go in there and do it. And just matter-of-factly sets the example. Guys, we know which direction we need to go. Let's go that direction. And even though the Israelites ignore it and they rebel, and that generation passes away, when the next generation comes in, these are their words: all that you have commanded us, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. And anyone who rebels against your command and does not obey your words and all that you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. I know those are the words they said to Joshua. But that's because Joshua and Caleb, servants of God, set the example. But they didn't just set an example. They adopted the priorities of their master. Like what God thinks is important, we think is important. And how God feels about something, we feel about that thing. And so when you get to Numbers chapter 14 and we read about the rebellion, look with me at the beginning of that chapter. All the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by a sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt." So we're going home. We're going home, and home, by the way, is back to slavery. Home is everything God has rescued us out of, but we're going back to that. And then in verse 5, Moses and Aaron fall on their faces, but look at verse 6. Joshua the son of Nun, Caleb the son of Jephunneh, and those who had spied out the land tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregations of the son of Israel. So Moses and Aaron are falling on their face, but it's Joshua and Caleb now who stand up and speak. But they don't just stand up and speak, they tear their clothes. There's a Hebrew word that is used there, kara. That is the idea of tearing, and it was symbolic. Whenever somebody was practicing kara, you knew that because they would rip their garments. They would cover themselves sometimes in sackcloth and ash, and they would put on this new apparel to show that I am not happy, I am mourning, I am in grief, I am ashamed. All of these concepts come to mind when you think of that. That's how that's how Caleb and Joshua, that's how Caleb feels about this. Grief-stricken. There's no doubt that it's related to the sight of seeing Israel come all this way just to go, you know what, we're not going to follow God. We're not going to enter into Canaan. We're not going to be in the land that God promised. We're not going to be in there in His midst. And I think that that's in some ways akin to the sorrow that we might feel when we see those who we recognize by their choices, by their decisions, I'm not going to be with God in heaven. I'm not choosing to follow Him. I'm not going to spend eternity with the Lord. It should heartbreak us. If we're going to be servants like Caleb, it should rend our hearts that that's the decision. He expresses that grief. But listen to what he says, him and Joshua. Listen to what they say again. They say, if the Lord is pleased with us. Why are they so tore up? I don't think it's just because, guys, you're missing out on a great opportunity. Like, that's some prime real estate over there. You guys have no idea. It's ours for the taking. It's going to be houses. You don't even have to furnish them. They're all ready for you. Fields, they've already been plowed. Like, that is A1. It's the best. No, that's not why we're upset. That's not what's caused us to rend our garments. Our master's commanded us go in there. This does not please Him. See, the importance that this stands to God is what is so important to us. God has found this a mightily important thing. God wants to bring us in here. God wants to give us this land. And us choosing to turn away is not going to please Him. And that breaks our heart that our King may not be pleased by our actions. Caleb has so promoted God in his life to a place of Lord that it is terribly heartbreaking when his people don't make his commands their greatest concern. And that motivation drives him, not just in that moment. It drives him throughout his life. When you get into the book of Joshua and what Luke read for us in Joshua 14, this is some 45 years later. This is a long period of time later. He's an 85-year-old man, and he stands up and he says to the children of Israel, but he speaks to Joshua, you remember when we made God's commands our priority? You remember when we said nothing's going to take our minds off of this? We need to go and we need to fight the people, and doesn't matter how big they are, because God is with us. Do you remember we made that commitment to follow the Lord fully? I haven't changed my mind. That passion hasn't dwindled in me. And I still want to go in. And in verses, really 7 through 12, he's talking about how I want to go into the land and I want Hebron. Hebron's where Anak, the descendants of Anak were. This is where the giants were at. He says, that's where I want to go. I want to go and I want to fight the battle and I want to win the war and I want to follow my God into it. And notice what he says, and let's look at the remainder of what was read, verses 10 through 12. Joshua 14, verses 10 through 12. Now behold, the Lord has let me live, just as he spoke these 45 years, from the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, when Israel walked in the wilderness, and now, behold, I am 85 years old today. I am still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war and for going out and coming in. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that Anakim were there with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. You know, his passion to still fight and his passion to do what God had set them out to do is amazing to me, but it's really the closing words of that sentence that really strikes me. What had not changed? The man who would tear his clothes because the people of Israel would not listen to what the Lord had spoke is now, 45 years later, saying, I want to go complete what the Lord spoke. Right there at the end of verse 12. I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. I am God's servant, and God has given me a command. That's the attitude of Caleb. That is his focus. Am I going to fight for the land? Yeah, I'm going to fight for the land. Am I going to fight for the notoriety of being the one who toppled all of these great giants? No, that's not why I'm going in there. I'm going to fight because this is the most choicest land. There's actually some idea that maybe it wasn't the most choicest land. Why are you going to do it then, Caleb? Because my God told me to. And God has said that's what he wants me to do, and nothing is going to take that away from me. I'm going to follow my Lord fully. Because he had adopted the priorities of his master. But he also was able to take all of that and be transformed by it in such a way that he shows God and his character, his nature. What you would expect from Caleb is a grizzled old man that has seen countless people die around him as they wander around in the wilderness for their own choices because of what they had done. And now we're going to go and we're going to battle, and there's all of this bloodshed that's around him. You would expect to find this very leathery, cold, hard person. But Joshua chapter 15, its counterpart is Judges chapter 1. It's just 4 verses. They're identical no matter which passage you're at. They're identical. So Judges 15, look at verses 16 through 19 with me. I want you to think about the character of Caleb here as he reflects the nature of God. So Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will give him Achsah, my daughter, as a wife. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, captured it, so he gave him Achsah as his daughter as a wife. It came about when she came to him, she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. So she alighted from the donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? And she said, give me a blessing. Since you have given me the land of the Negev, give me also springs of water. So he gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Now, it can be very tempting to overlay what's going on here in our sort of egalitarian, everyone has the same rights sort of society. And I'm not trying to diminish that view, but that's not the society he lives in. They live in a patricentric society. The father is the center of everything, and the fathers have specific commands here from God. Caleb has a specific command. Your daughters will not be married to the sons of Canaan. Your sons will not be given to the daughters of Canaan. And so Caleb has to come up with a way for his daughter to have a godly husband. So he says, I want my daughter to marry someone who takes the commands of God as seriously as I do. I want someone who's going to prove themselves to be a warrior that's fighting for God, to be the one that takes care of my daughter. And his nephew Othniel proves to be that person. But notice what happens next. They give them this land of Kiriath Sefer, and it's a land it's southwest of Hebron in a land called Debir. It's she calls it the Negev. It might not technically be all the way down in the Negev, but it is not known as a land that's just, oh, this has got all the great farmland in it. This is just the best place for us to live. She recognizes, I need some water. If this is the land that you're giving me, I need to ask you for water. And this is not, kids, this is not a daughter going, all right, Dad, you gave me a little bit. I want a little bit more. I'm not happy here. And this is not her asking for spite, like, all right, Dad, you give me away like I'm a piece of property. Well, I'm going to make it really cost you. What I really think we see here is a daughter that's looking for her future. She recognizes, I need to be able to grow crops here. I need to be able to provide for my family here. Like, Dad's given us this great thing, but there's some things that are missing. Dad, can we please have a field with a spring? And what does he do? He does the exact same thing that God does. Whenever God's people come to him and they ask for God's blessing, he gives abundantly more than they ask for. He lavishes upon her, not just a field with a spring. You can have the upper and the lower springs. You can have all the water. I'm giving you everything that you need. I want us to see in Caleb's character someone who has made their mind up as a servant of Yahweh, who is the God of Israel, not the God of the Kenites, but they have been graciously grafted in and welcomed to follow along and be a part of this journey. He says, that's my God, that's my master, and I'm going to follow him. And when he makes that decision, his life sets the example for others of what they should be doing and how it should look. His thinking is brought into the thinking of God to say, I want to think like my master thinks. And his life is transformed to say, I want you to see in me what I see in my master. I want you to see his qualities living in me. We need to have the different spirit of Caleb. We need to be holy servants who fully follow the Lord. And we need people with great tenacity and ferocious loyalty to say, Lord, you are my master, and I am here to set the example. I am here to show people what a servant looks like. We need people who are going to not wrestle with what's everybody else going to do. And does it matter that everybody else is maybe not choosing to follow me? Instead, we need to find people who will wrestle with, how can I, the best of my ability, do what God has called me to do? How can I be bold? And how can I be sacrificial? And how can I be different? Choosing to follow my Lord in a world that's busy saying, let's find us a new leader. Let's find us a different way. We need to be people who adopt the Lord's priorities. Jesus, when he came as a servant. And when he came, there was a moment towards the end of his life when he went up on a hill and he stood over the city of Jerusalem and he wept and he cried. His heart was broken within him. It's as if you could just see his heart rending as he cried and said, I wanted to love you in such a way as to protect you from everything that's coming. Like a mother hen that gathers her chicks in a rainstorm. I wanted to shelter you. I wanted to draw you in and protect you. I wanted good for you. And you refused that. You didn't want that. We see that picture of him, but we also see the next picture. Just some days later, as he's standing, or I should say, nailed, arms spread on a cross, dying for the same people that he wept for. Why? Because he had adopted the heart of God. He had the heart of God because he was God. We need to look at the world with more than just anger and shame. Whenever we see them choosing to walk in ways that reflect, I'm following a new leader and I'm going back to where I feel comfortable. I'm going back to where I can do what I want to do. We need to do more than just look at them with shame and shake our heads and say, that's pitiful. We need to have hearts that are rent like our Savior. And we don't do that. We don't do that so we can become the greatest evangelist. And we don't do that so we can become the greatest converter of souls. We do that because, as Caleb said, the Lord has spoken. Go into all the world and teach. We need to be people who share the Lord's priorities, and we need to be people who reflect the Lord's work. When you turn over to Galatians 5 and you start reading about the fruit of the Spirit, what you're really reading about, it's not just a list of good qualities, it's an opportunity for you to see what God looks like and how that can shine out in your lives. And I hope that we would begin that. Maybe we could begin that today with the picture of Caleb and his daughter. Parents, reflect the character of God into your children's lives. That is not just parents, give your children all the gifts, anything they ask for, give them more. Show them the love of God. Give them what God has given you. Give them His grace and give them His mercy. Give them peace and joy. Help them to see the reality of sin and the danger that it provides and that it serves in their lives. Help them to see the way of escape. Parents, start being servants to your children. Children, start being servants to your parents. Recognize the character of Christ when He, as God, didn't count it a thing to grasp and hold on to, say, I'm going to be equal with Him, but He made Himself lower. He made Himself submissive, subservient. He became the Son of God. He said, it was about my Father's will. It's what my Father wants. Children, you can be transformed to be holy servants of the Lord by setting the example and making the priority of God in your life as well, to show the example to others, to even your parents. We all need to be people who will go into this world and show them. This is what you can expect from the love of God. We need to be holy servants like Caleb. Now, I want to close really quickly with one more story, not specifically about Caleb, but about the Kenites, the people who Caleb comes from. So when you follow the Kenites through history, you find not a whole lot of information about them. They pop up here and there. In the book of Judges, it's the Kenites that pop up, and one of them specifically, Heber and his wife Jael, they have in some way kind of gotten connected with Sennacherib. Is that right? They've become connected with the antagonist in that story, and Jael's going to run a tent peg through his head. Okay, there's the Kenites popping back up in our stories. But when you go a little bit further down, you get to Saul. And God says, Saul, I want you to go and wipe out the Amalekites. Sisera, not Sennacherib, Sisera. It would come to me. So God says, Saul, I want you to go and I want you to wipe out the Amalekites. We know the story. You have Agag. He goes in. He goes, no, I'm not going to do everything God commanded me to do here. But there's something special that happens there in 1 Samuel 15. There's something special that happens. Saul goes into the land and he finds the Kenites living there. The Kenites have made themselves at home amongst the Amalekites. And Saul comes in and he says, look, I've got an order from God to wipe everybody out. You need to get out. You need to leave the land because destruction's coming and you don't want to get swept up in that destruction. And you know what the Kenites do? They say, message received, and they split. And no Kenites are recorded as being killed in that destruction because they heard the message preached to them. They heard the warning, and they said, it's time to get gone. Revelation 18 is God coming to His people and saying, the world is destined for destruction, and you need to come out of her, my people. You need to hear the warning. It's time for us to split. It's time for us to choose which master we're going to serve. Which master are you serving today? I hope you will take a lesson from the Kenites, a lesson from Caleb, and you will choose to follow the Lord, following Him fully, be holy servants of His. If we can help you with that this evening, come forward and let's talk together about that as we stand and sing.